Sabina awoke to the whisper of silk against her skin, a sensation so ingrained in her memory that it should have been a comfort. But this morning, the fabric felt rough, almost abrasive, and a dull, cold weight encircled her finger, burning with a subtle, sinister energy. Her hand flew to her face, her fingers tracing features that were not her own. A narrower jaw, a softer nose, skin that felt foreign beneath her touch. She pushed herself from the bed, her legs unsteady, and stumbled toward the full-length mirror across the chamber. The reflection that stared back stole the breath from her lungs. It was Gina's face, her maid's face, that looked out from the glass, eyes wide with a horror that mirrored her own. Sabina's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of panic. She clawed at the simple metal ring on her finger. But it wouldn't budge, searing her skin with each futile attempt as if rooted to her very bone. Memories of the previous night crashed over her, Gina helping her prepare for bed, the unusual herbal tea she'd insisted would calm Sabina's nerves for the journey to Alpha King Theseus's court. The girl her uncle had gifted her years ago, presented as a harmless, loyal companion, had always been a little too eager, a little too knowing. Now the truth was a poison in Sabina's veins. Gina was no mere maid. She was a witch, and this was dark magic of the oldest, most treacherous kind. The door to her chamber creaked open, and Sabina froze. There, framed in the doorway, stood her own face. Gina moved with a princess's grace, dressed in Sabina's finest traveling gown, a cruel parody of royalty. She didn't enter, didn't need to. Her triumph was a palpable force in the room. "The carriage awaits, my lady," Gina said, her voice a perfect imitation of Sabina's own, but laced with a mocking sweetness that made Sabina's stomach clench. "It is such a historic day for our kingdoms. I do hope you'll behave yourself while I'm away." Sabina could only watch, trapped in her servant's skin, as the impostor turned and glided away, the sound of her footsteps fading down the hall. The reality of her uncle's betrayal solidified like ice in her chest. This was a coup. He wasn't just stealing her crown, he was stealing her future, the peace between their kingdoms, everything. He was sending a witch to mate with Alpha King Theseus, to control the throne from the shadows. A desperate, wild plan began to form in her mind. She would follow. She would travel to Theseus's court not as a princess, but as the maid she appeared to be. She would find a way to expose the deception, to reach the Alpha King before the mating ceremony sealed this lie in blood and magic. She had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to stop a war, to reclaim her life, to prevent a monster from wearing her skin forever. The ring on her finger seemed to burn hotter, a constant reminder of the clock already ticking down. The royal caravan was a serpent of polished wood and gilded trim, but Sabina was now part of the dust it kicked up. She kept her head bowed, the coarse hood of a servant's cloak pulled low, her hands raw from clutching the straps of a travel-worn satchel. Every jolt of the supply wagon she rode in sent a fresh wave of despair through her. From this vantage point, she had a perfect, painful view of the lead carriage, her carriage, where the woman wearing her face sat framed in the window. Gina played the part of the princess with a sickening delicacy. She would wave a gloved hand at nothing, her smile a bland, pretty curve that never reached her eyes. It was wrong. All of it was wrong. The real Sabina had a wave that was a declaration, a smile that could cut like a blade or shine like the sun. This imitation was a ghost, a hollow echo, and it made Sabina's soul ache with a fury so hot it threatened to crack her composure. The servants around her, a jostling mass of weary bodies and low chatter, saw only their beloved princess. Their words were a constant, unwitting torture. "She looks so peaceful," a young laundress sighed. "A true lady," an older cook agreed. "So gentle, not like that Alpha King she's to mate with. They say his eyes are like winter frost, and he hasn't smiled since the war ended." The gossip flowed like a river, and Sabina drank it in, learning more of the world she was entering. Theseus, the boy she remembered with a lopsided grin and scraped knees, was now a ruler forged in the brutal history that had claimed both their fathers. A king who commanded fear, not warmth. The peace treaty was a fragile thread, and her uncle was sharpening the scissors. When the stark, formidable peaks of the Black Fang Keep finally pierced the horizon, a collective shiver ran through the servants. The castle was a monument to power, all sharp angles and dark stone, a far cry from the sun-warmed marble of her home. As they passed under the massive gatehouse, the shadow that fell over Sabina felt like a burial. She was assigned to the lower scullery, to pots and ashes and floors that would never be clean enough. It was there, hauling a bucket of water across a cavernous entrance hall, that she saw him. Alpha King Theseus descended the grand staircase, and the very air stilled. He was taller, broader, his youth carved away by war and rule. The storm-gray eyes she remembered, once bright with mischief, were now cold, assessing, sweeping over his domain with an unnerving stillness. Power radiated from him, a tangible force that made her want to both kneel and run. His gaze passed over her, a mere servant in his path, without a flicker of recognition. It was a physical blow, but her own heart, traitorously, clenched not with fear, but with a devastating, profound recognition. This was the boy who had shared his secrets with her. This was the king who held her future in his hands. And he saw only a maid. The stone floors of Black Fang Keep were unyielding, and the scent of lye soap had become a permanent stain in Sabina's senses. For days, she had moved in a haze of exhaustion, her muscles screaming in protest, her hands red and chapped. Every clatter of a pot, every snapped order from the head housekeeper, was a fresh reminder of how far she had fallen. The weight of the cursed ring on her finger was a constant, cold companion, a shackle that no one else could see. She was a ghost in her own life, watching a puppet wearing her face parade through the castle, trailing the perfumed lie of royalty. It was on the third day, while cleaning the endless, drafty corridors near the royal quarters, that her body finally rebelled. A wave of dizziness sent her stumbling against a cold stone wall, the world swimming in and out of focus. The assigned maid for the Alpha King's personal chambers had fallen ill, and the head housekeeper, with a dismissive sneer, had thrust a bucket and rags into Sabina's hands. "Don't touch anything, don't be seen, just make it shine." Pushing open the heavy oak door to his chambers was like stepping into another world. Here, the air was different. It was clean and cold, carrying the faint, wild scent of pine and frost, underscored by something uniquely masculine, something that was undeniably him. The room was sparsely furnished, but what was there spoke of raw power and unspoken burdens. A massive desk carved from a single dark wood was littered with maps and scrolls. A fire crackled in the great hearth, casting long, dancing shadows over furs thrown across a wide, low-backed chair, and in the center of the room stood the bed. It was not a piece of furniture. It was a territory, a vast expanse of dark linens and thick, silken furs, piled high with pillows. It seemed to pull at her, a siren's call to her bone-deep weariness. She fought it. She truly did. She scrubbed the floor until her knees ached, dusted the shelves until her arms trembled. But the bed's invitation was a physical force. Just for a moment, she thought. Just to feel something soft against her skin once more. She sat, then lay back, the luxurious furs enveloping her. The scent of him, Theseus, was strongest here, a potent mix of leather, night air, and the crisp, electric tang of a coming storm. It was the scent of the boy from her memories, now grown into a man, and it was the most terrifying comfort she had ever known. Her eyes, heavy with days of stolen sleep, fluttered shut. For the first time since the mirror had shown her a stranger, she felt a flicker of safety. It was a lie, of course, but her exhausted body believed it. She did not know how long she slept, but she was dreaming of him. Not the cold king, but the boy. They were by the old oak tree at the border, and he was laughing, carving their initials into the bark, his gray eyes bright with a light she thought the war had extinguished forever. A voice, hard and real, shattered the dream. "Get up!" The command was like a splash of icy water. Sabina's eyes flew open. He stood over her, his frame blotting out the firelight, casting her in his shadow. Theseus. His expression was not just angry. It was a thunderhead of violated sovereignty. This was his most private space, and she, a lowly servant, had defiled it. "On your feet," he snarled, his voice low and lethal. Every instinct honed from a lifetime of privilege told her to stand her ground, while every new lesson in survival screamed at her to grovel. It was the princess who won. She rose from his bed, her legs unsteady, but her spine straight. She met his furious gaze and did not look away. "Explain yourself," he demanded, the words cracking through the room like a whip. For a fleeting second, she considered a lie, but the exhaustion and the lingering warmth of his scent made her reckless. "The explanation is simple, Your Majesty," she said, her voice husky from sleep. "Your floors are clean. Your hearth is swept. The price for such cleanliness is a body pushed to its breaking point. This one simply broke." He took a step closer, the air crackling with his dominance. "You think wit is a substitute for obedience. You trespass in my chambers, sleep in my bed, and dare to speak to me as if we are equals?" "We are both breathing the same air," she retorted, a spark of her old fire igniting. "That makes us equals in that, at least. And I was assigned to clean this room. If my presence in it is a trespass, then the command itself was the first transgression. I am merely the consequence." Theseus went utterly still. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes, narrowed, scanning her face with an intensity that felt like being stripped bare. He was looking for the fear, the deference, the dullness he expected from a servant. He found none of it. Instead, he found a sharp, unyielding intelligence that challenged him. He found a spirit that refused to be bent. It was maddening. It was intriguing. "Who are you?" The question was quieter now, stripped of some of its fury, replaced by a deep, probing curiosity. "No one you would recognize," she whispered, the truth of the statement a sharp pain beneath her ribs. "I decide who and what I recognize," he said, his voice a low rumble. He circled her, a predator assessing strange prey. "You have the hands of a maid, the dress of a maid, but the tongue of a courtier and the eyes of a—" He trailed off, unable to finish, but the unspoken word hung between them. "Equal." He stopped in front of her again, his decision made. "You will continue to attend these chambers, exclusively. I want you here, cleaning, tending the fire, delivering my meals." Sabina's breath hitched. This was what she wanted, wasn't it? Proximity, a chance. "But understand this," he continued, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more threat than promise. "You are now a puzzle I intend to solve. Every word you say, every move you make, I will be watching. The impertinence you displayed today, do it again. I want to see it." He turned and walked to his desk, dismissing her as if she were a curious book he had plucked from a shelf. Sabina stood rooted to the spot, the victory feeling like a noose around her neck. She had his attention. The most dangerous wolf in the kingdom now had his sights set on her, not as a princess to be won, but as a mystery to be unraveled. The ring on her finger felt colder than ever. Her greatest opportunity had just become a gilded cage, and she was locked inside with him. The great hall was a cavern of firelight and shadow. Its stone walls hung with banners that bore the scars of past wars. At its center, seated at the high table, Alpha King Theseus endured the welcome banquet with a face carved from granite. Across from him, draped in silks that had been meant for Sabina, sat the woman who wore her face. "Princess Sabina," Theseus began, his voice carefully neutral. "I trust your journey was not too taxing." Gina offered a smile so placid it was like still water. "Your hospitality makes any hardship forgettable, Your Majesty." The words were correct, the tone sweet, but they landed with a dull thud in his soul. He searched her eyes, Sabina's eyes, for a flicker of the fire that had once burned there. He found only a pleasant, vacant blue. "Do you remember?" he pressed, leaning forward slightly. "The summer we dammed the creek near the border, how the water overflowed and flooded old Lord Malcor's garden." Gina's smile didn't slip, but it tightened at the edges. "The war. It blurred so many of my happier memories, I fear. It changed me." She dropped her gaze, a gesture meant to seem demure. I am not the wild girl I once was. Theseus felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Not the wild girl. The phrase was a betrayal. The wild girl was everything he remembered. The wild girl was the point. Of course, he said, leaning back, the distance between them stretching into a chasm. He tried again, later, mentioning the secret language they'd invented, the nonsense words that had sent them into helpless laughter. Oh, such silly children we were, Gina replied with a tinkling laugh that felt like shards of glass in his ears. She changed the subject to the weather. He watched her throughout the evening. She was perfectly docile, perfectly agreeable, a reflection with no substance. She ate with delicate precision, praised the food with generic compliments, and her laughter never reached her eyes. This was not the girl who had debated battle strategies with him at 14, her small hands gesturing wildly as she outlined a flanking maneuver that had, days later, helped his father win a skirmish. This was a stranger draped in a beloved skin, and the wrongness of it was a constant, dissonant hum in his blood. From the shadowed archway reserved for servants, the real Sabina watched the spectacle, her nails digging into her palms. She saw the hope in Theseus's eyes slowly die, replaced by a puzzled, then resigned disappointment. She saw him try, again and again, to reach the friend he remembered, only to have his words slide off the polished, empty surface of Gina's performance. It was the oak tree. She screamed silently at him, her heart a frantic wounded bird in her chest. Ask her what we carved beside our names, but he didn't. He gave up. She saw the exact moment his shoulders settled into a line of acceptance, a king resigning himself to a political reality, however disappointing. The pain was a physical wound, sharper than the magic that had stolen her face. To be so close, to see him trying to find her, and to be utterly invisible. It was a new kind of hell. That night, as she moved through the profound silence of his chambers, the weight of his disappointment still hung in the air. She could not speak, but she could remind. It was a dangerous game, a dance on the edge of a blade. But her breaking heart left her no choice. Her first act was subtle. On his desk, amidst the stark military reports, she placed a single, dried oak leaf, its edges brittle with age. It was from a species that only grew in one particular valley along their old border. He would likely dismiss it as tracked in by a boot, but the seed was planted. Then she attended to the furs on his bed, the same ones she had collapsed into. As she smoothed them, she arranged them not in the practical, symmetrical order the head housekeeper demanded, but in the way she had always liked as a child. The gray wolf pelt on the left, the black bear fur on the right. It was a small, irrational preference, one her childhood self had declared the proper order of things during a long-ago visit. Would he remember? The final clue was the most reckless. On the corner of his map, the one detailing the northern territories where their fathers had fought their bloodiest battle, she did not write a word. Words could be traced. Instead, using the tip of a cooled coal from the hearth, she drew a tiny, simple symbol. It was the mark they had used to signify a secret meeting place, a circle with a line through it, representing the sun dipping below the standing stone in the meadow. She finished her work and fled the room, her pulse thundering in her ears. She had planted seeds in barren soil. Would they take root, or would he see only the random acts of a peculiar maid? The risk was immense, but the sight of him trying to find a ghost in that hollow princess had left her with no other choice. The real Sabina had begun her silent siege. The seeds she had planted began to take root in the silence of his mind. Theseus stood before his strategy map, his fingers resting on the precise tiny mark in the northern territory, a circle with a line through it, the mark of the standing stone. It was charcoal, smudged as if by accident, but its placement was too deliberate, too perfectly aligned with the memory it evoked. His eyes drifted to his bed, the furs arranged in that strangely specific order, gray on the left, black on the right. A childish rule from a childhood he thought buried. And on his desk, the oak leaf, brittle and brown. Coincidence could only stretch so far before it snapped. And then there was the maid. Elara, she called herself. A name as plain as the face she wore. But there was nothing plain about her. He began to linger in his chambers while she worked, pretending to read reports, all his senses tuned to her presence. He saw the way her eyes, sharp and assessing, scanned the battle plans left open on his desk. One afternoon, he found a slight, almost imperceptible correction made in charcoal to a supply line route on a map of the Southern Pass, a correction that mirrored a tactical flaw he himself had noted but had not yet amended. It was the kind of insight taught in royal war rooms, not sculleries. The confrontation came late one night. He found her not cleaning but standing before his bookshelf, her fingers trailing over the spine of an old epic of Lycan history, a dense, dry text few had the patience to read. "You can read?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. She didn't jump. She simply turned, her gaze steady. "Most people can, Your Majesty." "Not that," he said, nodding toward the book. "That is not a story for maids. It's a treatise on governance and pack hierarchy." "And are maids not part of your pack hierarchy?" she countered, a challenge glinting in her eyes. "Or are we simply the foundation you walk upon without thought?" It was the impertinence he'd commanded, and it should have angered him. Instead, it thrilled him. It was a spark in the stifling dark of his court. He gestured to the chairs by the fire. "Sit." The command was Alpha, but the invitation was not. For a long moment, she hesitated, a servant poised on the edge of a precipice. Then she sat, back straight, hands folded in her lap, every inch a queen holding court in a servant's dress. They spoke. At first, it was a sparring match. Politics, the history of the war, the burdens of rule. She debated him not with flattery, but with fierce, undeniable logic, her arguments layered with an intimate understanding of the tensions between their kingdoms that no commoner should possess. She spoke of the cost of war on the border villages with a passion that felt personal. And then, without warning, the conversation slipped into the past. He mentioned, offhand, a forgotten ballad about the first Lycan king. "The Ballad of the Howling Star," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the flames. "You always said the third verse was the truest, that a king's strength isn't in his bite, but in the pack he builds." Theseus went utterly still. The air left his lungs. He had said that. He'd said it to one person only, years ago, under the canopy of that old oak tree, to a girl who had scoffed at the popular bloodthirsty versions of the tale. The world tilted. The maid's borrowed face blurred before him, and for a dizzying second, he saw not the servant, but the ghost of the princess, the sharp mind, the unyielding spirit, the familiar soul. The draw he felt toward her was no longer just intrigue. It was a deep, gravitational pull, a recognition that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. The following day, the precarious game she was playing became infinitely more dangerous. Lord Kale, her uncle, arrived at court. Sabina saw him from an upper window, his arrival a spectacle of false concern and polished steel. He dismounted from his horse, his personal guard, a contingent far too large for a peaceful visit, fanning out behind him with practiced ease. He embraced the false princess with theatrical warmth, but his eyes, cold and calculating as a hawk's, scanned the castle walls, assessing, measuring, claiming. He was here to oversee the final stage of the coup. The mating ceremony would not just unite the kingdoms, it would deliver a docile, controlled queen and a distracted king right into his hands. His forces were now inside the wolf's den, positioning themselves to seize the throat the moment the treaty was sealed. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Sabina's throat. She had to move faster. That night, in the desperate privacy of the servant's latrine, she again fought the cursed ring. She used grease, soap, brute force, twisting and pulling until the skin around her finger was raw and bleeding. The cold metal only seemed to burn hotter, searing her flesh with a pain that shot up her arm. A faint, whispering echo of Gina's magic slithered through her veins, a venomous reminder that the witch's hold was tightening, becoming a part of her. The more she struggled, the deeper the roots of the spell sank. Time was no longer a ticking clock. It was a noose, and her uncle had just taken up the rope. Theseus was getting closer to the truth, but he was also now surrounded by the enemy, and she was trapped between them, a princess in a cage of her own skin. screaming a warning that no one could hear. The opulent receiving room felt like a cage. Theseus had orchestrated this private audience with the princess, a final, desperate attempt to quiet the screaming wrongness in his blood. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, glinting off the gilded frames and the woman's perfect golden hair. She was a painting of royalty, and he was growing to hate paintings. "It feels a lifetime ago," he began, his tone casually conversational as he poured 2 goblets of wine. "Those days by the border. Do you remember the nonsense words we invented? Our secret language." Gina accepted the goblet with a graceful nod, her smile placid. "Of course. Children's games. So charming." "What was the word for sword?" he asked, his eyes fixed on her. The placid smile did not falter, but it became brittle. "Oh, my love, it has been so long. The war. It stole so many of those silly little details from me." "It was Krell," Theseus said softly, the fabricated word feeling alien on his tongue after so many years. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, the alpha in him pushing against the space between them. "And what was the word for promise?" Her eyes, Sabina's beautiful blue eyes, flickered for a fraction of a second. There was nothing there. No recollection, no fondness, not even a clever lie. Just a void. I cannot recall. Forgive me. I am not the girl I was." "No," he thought, the certainty settling in his gut like a stone. "You are not." The rest of the meeting was a blur of her hollow pleasantries. The moment she was gone, he summoned his most trusted spy master. "I want everything on Princess Sabina. Every document, every portrait from childhood, every witness account of her life before the war. I want to know if she had a scar, a birthmark, a favorite food." The reports that came back were flawless. The documents were perfect. The descriptions matched the woman in his guest chambers. The portrait, commissioned just a year prior, was undeniably her. The evidence was a wall of impeccable logic, and it infuriated him. His wolf snarled at the paper trail, sensing a lie it could not see. Frustration was a bitter taste in his mouth. He retreated to his chambers, the only place where the world made a twisted kind of sense. He found her there, the maid, Ilara, stoking the fire. The flames cast shifting shadows over her unremarkable features. He did not speak at first, simply watched her work, the quiet efficiency of her movements a strange balm. He found himself talking, pouring out his frustration about the princess, about the maddening perfection of the records, about the ghost of a girl he could not find. "It's like speaking to an echo," he growled, running a hand through his hair. "The shape of the sound is there, but the substance is gone." She was silent for a long moment, her back to him. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "Perhaps you are looking for the wrong thing." "And what should I be looking for?" he demanded, the weight of the day crushing him. She turned, her gaze distant, lost in memory. "Perhaps you should look for the promise," she murmured, almost to herself. "The one carved into the roots, not the trunk. The one that said, 'No borders between us.'" Time stopped. The air in the room solidified. Theseus felt the words strike him with the force of a physical blow, unlocking a vault in his soul he had sealed shut years ago. The oak tree. They had carved their initials on the trunk for all to see, but later, hidden amongst the gnarled roots, they had carved that single, foolish, heartfelt phrase. A child's vow. A secret within a secret. He had never spoken of it to another living soul. His eyes snapped to hers, wide with a storm of disbelief and dawning, impossible hope. "What did you say?" The spell broke. Panic flooded her face, erasing the fleeting vulnerability. She shook her head, backing away. "Nothing. It was nothing. A folk tale." "That was no folk tale," he said, his voice low and dangerously intent. He took a step toward her. "How do you know that? Tell me." But the fear had taken hold. She turned and fled, a whisper of gray linen disappearing through the door before he could stop her. Theseus stood alone in the sudden silence, the words, "No borders between us," echoing in the space she had vacated. The thread that had connected them, that faint, puzzling line, was now a taut, vibrating wire. He was no longer investigating a mystery. He was hunting a truth, and it was wearing a servant's dress. Across the castle, in the lavish chambers of the false princess, Gina's eyes flew open. A tremor in the magical weave she had spun around the Alpha King had jolted her from a light trance. She felt it, a shift, a connection forming where none should exist. A challenge. Her lips curled into a sneer. The little maid was proving more troublesome than anticipated. She closed her eyes, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. Invisible threads of magic, dark and subtle, slithered from her room like serpents. They were not meant to harm, not yet. They were spells of diversion, of misfortune, of gentle repulsion. They would make buckets slip, stairs seem uneven, and fill the Alpha King's mind with a vague, unexplainable irritation whenever the maid drew near. She would build an invisible wall between them, brick by magical brick. The game had changed. The crack in Sabina's mask had been seen, and now the witch began to seal the fortress. The obsession was a fever in Theseus's blood. The flawless evidence about the princess was a lie he could feel in his bones, and the key to unraveling it was the woman who cleaned his hearth. He began to orchestrate her presence, assigning her tasks that required her to be near him, mending his cloaks, organizing his war room scrolls, serving his private meals. He watched her. He saw the way her eyes, sharp and perceptive, would trace the lines of a treaty as if assessing its merit. He saw the way her fingers, though reddened from work, handled his grandfather's silver inkwell with an innate reverence, a familiarity with fine things that no scullery maid should possess. The chemistry between them became a living entity in the room. A charged silence would fall when their hands brushed as she passed him a goblet. A glance held a moment too long would speak volumes neither could voice. During a discussion on border tariffs, she challenged his logic with such fierce intelligence that he forgot she was a servant, responding to her as he would a council member. Their debate a sharp, exhilarating dance of minds. For Sabina, it was a sweet, exquisite torture. Her wolf, dormant and confused since the spell, now stirred with a force that threatened to shatter her control. It recognized its mate. It yearned for him, howling inside her for a connection her human form could not make. Every accidental touch was a jolt of lightning, every shared look, a promise her cursed lips could not keep. She was balancing on a knife's edge, her heart laid bare in a face he could not see. The breaking point came on a night of howling wind. He stood by the fire, his broad shoulders etched with a profound weariness she had never seen in him before. "She is not what I remember," he said, his voice low and raw, not looking at her, yet speaking to her as if she were his confessor. "The princess. There is nothing there, no fire, no challenge. The mate bond. It should be a pull, a certainty. With her, there is only silence." The words were a dagger twisted in Sabina's soul. A sob built in her throat, and she turned away, her shoulders trembling. "Alara?" he asked, his voice softening. The sound of that false name on his lips broke her. She wanted to scream, "It's me! I'm here! Look at me!" She spun around, the words a torrent behind her eyes, her true self screaming to be let out. But as she opened her mouth, the cursed ring on her finger seared into her flesh with a white-hot agony. A vicious warning from the magic that bound her. The pain stole her breath, a visceral reminder of her prison. The truth died on her tongue, replaced by a strangled gasp. She could only shake her head. Tears she could not explain streaming down Gina's borrowed cheeks. Theseus saw the tears, the raw, inexplicable pain in her eyes, and it confused him more than any riddle. Why would a maid weep for his lack of a bond with another woman? That night, haunted and desperate, Sabina moved like a ghost through the castle's lower corridors, seeking a moment of solace in the silent kitchens. It was there, hidden in the deep shadows of the pantry archway, that she heard them, the low conspiratorial whispers. She pressed herself against the cold stone, her breath held. "The ceremony is in 1 week." Her uncle's voice was a cold, sharp blade in the dark. "Are the preparations complete?" "The spells are in place," Gina's voice replied, stripped of its false sweetness, now pure, venomous ambition. The moment he marks me, the bond will be a chain around his neck, not mine. His will shall be mine to command. Good. The instant the kingdoms are officially bound, my men will be in position. He will have a tragic, sudden accident. A grief-stricken queen and a loyal uncle will be all that remains to steer both thrones. The silence that followed was more terrifying than their words. 1 week. They weren't just stealing a crown. They were planning to murder the Alpha King. The peace was not their goal. It was the weapon they would use to shatter everything. Sabina slid down the wall, her legs giving way, the cold of the stones seeping into her bones. The personal agony of her stolen face was now a trivial thing compared to the monstrous plot she had uncovered. Theseus's life, and the fate of 2 kingdoms, had a timer ticking down to 7 days, and she was the only one who knew. The stone walls of Black Fang Keep, once a symbol of imposing security, now felt like they were closing in. Theseus could no longer quiet the roar of his wolf, which snarled in defiance every time the false princess was near. In the privacy of his war room, he turned to his oldest friend and most trusted general, Kalin. "There is a sickness in this court," Theseus growled, his fists clenched on the map-strewn table. "It wears a pretty face and speaks with a forked tongue. I want you to look into Princess Sabina, not the documents. They are lies. Find someone from her past, a forgotten servant, a retired guard from her kingdom. I want to know if she ever had a childhood illness, a broken bone, a fear of storms. Anything that does not match the doll now residing in my guest wing." Kalin, a man of few words and unwavering loyalty, simply nodded. The hunt for truth had begun. But Theseus's heart was not in the hunt. It was in his chambers, with the woman who filled the silence with sharp wit and sharper truths. He now openly sought her out, having her deliver his evening reports, asking her opinion on trade disputes, finding any excuse to be near her. The court noticed. Whispers slithered through the halls like venomous snakes. The Alpha King was enchanted by a low-born maid, spurning his royal bride. The gossip was a danger, but it was a flame he found he could not and would not extinguish. For Sabina, the whispers were a death knell. Time, once a distant threat, was now a wolf at her heels. With her uncle's guards woven through the castle and Gina's magical web tightening, she knew evidence was her only hope. Proof of witchcraft, of treason. Something tangible Theseus could hold in his hands and believe. The risk was monumental, but desperation was her only compass. Waiting for a moment when Gina was occupied with a fitting for her mating ceremony gown, Sabina used a servant's knowledge of hidden passages to slip into the princess's chambers. The room was a perfumed lie, but the truth was hidden beneath it. In a locked chest, concealed beneath a false bottom, Sabina found her nightmare. Vials of dark viscous liquid, bundles of twisted herbs that smelled of grave dirt, and ancient texts bound in what looked like skin, and nestled among them, letters. Her uncle's precise, cruel script detailing the timeline, the placement of his men, and the command for Gina to use the mating bond to shatter Theseus's will. Her hands trembled as she reached for the damning papers. This was it. This would save him. "I knew the rodent would eventually come sniffing," a voice, cold and smooth as polished ice, cut through the silence. Sabina spun around. Gina stood in the doorway, her true nature bleeding through the stolen face, making Sabina's own features look twisted and cruel. "You think you can steal from me?" Gina hissed, stepping inside. The door clicked shut, locked by an unseen force. "This is not yours to take," Sabina shot back, clutching the letters. "Nothing here is mine," Gina smiled, a horrific sight. "I take what I want, and I will have a kingdom." She raised a hand, and the air crackled. An invisible force slammed into Sabina, throwing her against the wall. The artifacts in the chest rattled, and the shadows in the room seemed to writhe and deepen. Sabina fought back with the only weapon she had, her own defiant spirit, a raw energy that pushed against the magic. She was not a witch, but she was a princess, an Alpha's daughter, and she would not be cowed. The magical struggle was silent and brutal. Vials shattered, spraying dark liquid. The very light in the room flickered as 2 wills clashed, one of ancient practiced darkness, the other of pure, desperate truth. With a final guttural cry, Sabina shoved forward, breaking Gina's concentration for a split second. It was all she needed. She scrambled for the door, the letters still clutched in her hand, and fled into the passageway, just as a bolt of corrosive magic seared the stone where her head had been. She did not stop running until she was deep in the bowels of the castle, hidden in a dusty storeroom, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. She had the evidence. She had won. But then, Gina's voice whispered in her mind. A venomous thread of magic carried on the air. "Go ahead, little princess. Show him. Speak my name. Reveal the truth. And the moment you do, the spell woven into that ring will not just kill you. It will erase you. There will be nothing left for your Alpha King to mourn." As the words faded, the metal band on Sabina's finger contracted violently, becoming a searing band of agony that bit deep into her flesh. A thin trickle of blood welled up around it. It was no longer just a prison. It was a collar, with Gina holding the chain. She had the truth in her hands, but she was now utterly forbidden from speaking it. The night of the pack run was a sacred tradition, a display of primal power and unity required of all royal visitors. Under the swollen moon, the air thrummed with the energy of shifting bones and rising fur. Theseus, in his massive smoke-gray wolf form, stood at the head of his pack, his gaze fixed on the woman who wore Sabina's face. As one, they surged into the forest, a river of muscle and instinct. The false princess ran beside him, her own wolf form sleek and golden, but perfectly ordinary. There was no spark, no answering call in his blood. His wolf felt nothing but a hollow disdain for the creature loping at his flank. It was like running with a ghost. Then the wind shifted. It carried a scent from the castle walls, a scent of soap and exhaustion, yes, but beneath it, a thread of something else. Something that made his wolf's head snap up, nostrils flaring. Wildflowers in sunlight, oak wood and courage. The ghost of a memory. A promise made a lifetime ago. His massive form skidded to a halt, ignoring the confused glances of his pack. He turned, his storm-gray eyes piercing the darkness, seeking the source. And he found her. A small, solitary figure standing on the high battlements, watching the run, her borrowed face pale in the moonlight. Their eyes met across the impossible distance, and the world exploded. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a lightning strike to the soul, a seismic shock that locked his bones and stole his breath. The mate bond, dormant and silent for so long, roared to life with a ferocity that was both agony and ecstasy. It was a cord of pure energy, snapping taut between his heart and hers. Undeniable, irrevocable, and right. A low, wounded sound ripped from his wolf's throat, a howl of recognition and possession. He took a single, involuntary step toward the castle, toward her, before his human mind wrestled back control. He shifted back in a ripple of agonizing transformation, standing naked and shaken in the moonlit clearing. He didn't look at the golden wolf staring at him in confusion. His eyes were still locked on the battlements, on the maid who had just rewritten his entire reality. He found her in his chambers, her entire body trembling. She had felt it too. The connection was a live wire between them, humming with the truth she could not speak. "What was that?" Theseus demanded, his voice raw as he pulled on a tunic. He was still vibrating with the force of it. "What did you do?" Sabina shook her head, tears streaming down Gina's face, her own soul screaming behind her eyes. She opened her mouth, the words, "I am Sabina," forming on her tongue. The spell seized her. It was a serpent of dark magic coiling around her throat, choking the truth into silence. She gasped, clawing at her neck, her face turning pale with the effort. No sound came out but a strangled, desperate rasp. "Tell me!" he roared, grabbing her shoulders, his confusion and the overwhelming rightness of the bond making him frantic. "Who are you?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a love and agony so profound it shattered him. And seeing that his world of logic and evidence had failed, that words had been stolen from her, she did the only thing left she could do. She rose onto her toes, grabbed the front of his tunic, and crushed her lips to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a confession, a rebellion. a plea. It was every stolen childhood memory, every moment of longing, every secret shared under an oak tree, poured into a single, searing point of contact. Theseus froze for a heartbeat, stunned. Then, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her hard against him as he surrendered to the storm. His mind was a chaos of questions, but his soul was home. The kiss was a key turning in a lock he didn't know he possessed. The feel of her, the taste of her, the way her spirit met his. It was all a devastating, perfect recognition. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and shaken, he stared down at the servant's face, but he no longer saw it. He saw the truth behind it. The world he had known had tilted off its axis, and everything he thought was solid had crumbled to dust. "It's you," he whispered. The words not a question, but a staggering, impossible certainty. "It's always been you." The scent of old parchment and dried herbs clung to the air in the court mage's tower. Theseus stood before the wizened old wolf, his patience worn thin. "A face not her own," the mage mused, tapping a gnarled finger on a yellowed text. "Such magic is old, your majesty. Deeply forbidden. It does not simply paint an illusion. It binds the soul to a new shell." "How is it broken?" Theseus demanded, the memory of the maid's kiss burning on his lips. "The anchor," the mage said, his milky eyes sharp. "Such a spell cannot be sustained from a distance. It requires a physical tether, an object the victim is forced to wear, a locket, a bracelet, most commonly, a ring, something they can never remove." Theseus's blood went cold. A ring. The simple, unadorned metal band on Alara's finger that she was always twisting, touching, as if it pained her. The piece that had never fit the puzzle of her spirit. He found her in the library, dusting shelves with a frantic energy. He didn't speak, simply took her hand. His thumb brushed over the cold, plain metal. Sabina flinched, but not from his touch. It was a flinch of overwhelming, soul-crushing relief. Her eyes, those windows to her true self, swam with tears as she looked from the ring to his face. "Yes," her gaze screamed. "Finally, you see it." The pieces were no longer scattered. They were forming a terrifying picture. He began a quiet, deliberate campaign of testing. In court, he would ask the princess about the sword forms her father had taught her. Gina would smile and speak of a lady's embroidery. Later, in his chambers, he would mention the same forms to the maid, and she would, without thinking, correct his own stance, her body moving with the muscle memory of royal training. He asked the princess about the melody of a lullaby her mother had sung. She hummed a popular generic tune. He hummed a few bars of the true, complex melody to the maid. And she went still, her eyes distant with a pain so profound it could not be feigned. Gina felt the ground crumbling beneath her. The Alpha King's eyes, once cool with political acceptance, now saw through her with analytical ice. Desperation became her new strategy. She went to her uncle, her composure cracking. "He knows, or he is too close. We must move the ceremony, now." Her uncle, sensing the same shift, agreed. The mating ceremony was announced for 3 days hence. The castle erupted in a frantic, accelerated rush of preparations. But Gina wasn't finished. That night, she wove her most potent spell yet, a compulsion of forced bonding, designed to artificially trigger the mate bond and cloud Theseus's mind with a false sense of completion. As she chanted in the darkness, Theseus, working in his study, was struck by a wave of nausea so violent he collapsed to his knees. A foreign, sickly sweet pressure clamped around his mind, trying to smother the fierce, clean pull he felt toward his maid. It was like being force-fed poison while craving clear water. His wolf revolted, howling in rejection. He retched, his body violently expelling the magical violation. Gasping on the cold floor, sweat beading on his brow, his confusion crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. The illness was not natural. The accelerated timeline was not coincidence. It was the panic of a trapper whose prey was escaping. The deception was no longer a puzzle to be solved. It was a disease to be cut out, and he now knew exactly where to make the incision. Theseus's chambers, usually a place of formidable energy, were now thick with the silence of sickness. He lay in his bed, his skin clammy, his powerful frame weakened not by a physical wound, but by the violent rejection of Gina's corrupt magic. Sabina watched him, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She could not wait for him to recover. The clock was ticking down, and her uncle's shadow was already stretching across the throne. While the court physicians fretted, Sabina moved. The meek maid was gone, burned away in the fire of necessity. In her place was a princess, moving through the castle's underbelly with a regal purpose that belied her face. She sought out the sharp-eyed stable master who had frowned at the princess's perfect, unearned horsemanship. She found the elderly scribe who had noticed the princess's signature was a flawless forgery, lacking the subtle flourish of the real Sabina's hand. In hushed conversations in dusty corners and silent pantries, she built a fragile web of allegiance, a handful of loyalists who saw the cracks in the carefully constructed facade. It was the court mage, brought to her in secret, who confirmed her most desperate hope and her deepest fear. "The ring," he whispered, his eyes on the cursed band. "Such spells are tied to the caster's life force. It can be broken in two ways: by the unconditional, official claim of a true mate, a power that would shatter the magic's foundation." Sabina's hope soared, then crashed. Theseus could not claim her, not while the world saw her as a servant. A king's claim was a public, political act. To do so now would be seen as madness, a scandal that would destabilize his rule before they could even reveal the truth. "Or," she asked, her voice hollow, "or by the death of the witch who cast it, sever the source, and the magic unravels." Murder. The word hung, cold and ugly, in the air. To reclaim her face, her life, she would have to stain her hands with blood. It was a line she wasn't sure she could cross, but as she grappled with this impossible choice, her network delivered a final, horrifying piece of intelligence. Her uncle's men were not just positioning themselves for a coup. They were placing specific, rune-carved stones at key points throughout the castle: the barracks, the great hall, the gates. And they were doing it under the direction of the false princess. The mage, upon hearing this, turned ashen. "Blood magic," he breathed. "A perversion of the mate bond. If the Alpha King completes the mating ceremony with the impostor, the bond will be created, but it will be a conduit. Her uncle, he will be able to use their joined blood to siphon the Alpha's power, to control his commands, or," he swallowed, "or simply extinguish his life force from a distance, making it look like a tragic death after consummation." The stakes were no longer about a throne or a stolen identity. It was about the very soul of the man she loved being turned into a puppet, his life held in the hands of a traitor. The mating ceremony was in 2 days. She was trapped in the wrong skin. Her king was weakened, and the only ways out were shrouded in impossibility or sin. The rebellion within the castle walls had begun, but the one within Sabina's own heart, between her morality and her desperation, was just reaching its brutal crescendo. The great hall was a symphony of false cheer and glittering deception. At the high table, Gina preened in Sabina's silks, while Lord Kale surveyed his impending victory with a smug, satisfied glee. Theseus, pale but resolute, sat between them, a king holding his throne by sheer force of will. The air was thick with the cloying scent of roasted meat and impending doom. Then the music faltered. A figure stood in the main archway, clad not in servant's gray, but in a simple dark dress that made her a shadow against the torchlight. It was the maid, Ilara. But the way she stood, chin high, shoulders squared, a regal fury burning in her eyes, was anything but servile. A hush fell, rolling through the court like a wave. She did not rush. She walked, each step a measured beat of defiance on the stone floor. She stopped in the center of the hall, the eyes of the entire kingdom upon her, and spoke, her voice clear and cutting, carrying the weight of her bloodline. "You sit at this table wearing my face," she said, her gaze locked on Gina. "But you are a hollow thing, a puppet with a stolen string." Gina's smile was a brittle mask. "The poor girl is mad with envy. Guards, remove her." Before you do, Sabina's voice rang out, answer me this. What was the name of our secret hideout by the Silverfall Creek? The one we carved our names into? A flicker of panic in Gina's eyes. The war has stolen such trivialities from me. It was Wolf's Haven, Sabina declared to the court. She turned her piercing gaze to Theseus. And you, your majesty, the scar on your left shoulder. How did you get it? Theseus's stormy eyes were blazing, fixed on her. He knew. We fell from the great oak tree, he said, his voice low but carrying. You tried to grab me, and a branch tore into me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. And the peace treaty, Sabina pressed, turning back to Gina, her voice trembling with a lifetime of pain. The one our fathers wrote before yours betrayed mine. Quote the first line, the real first line, not the one in the official records. Gina opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The magic that gave her the face could not give her the soul. The words were lost to her. It began, Sabina said, her voice breaking with the memory. In the hope that our children will know a peace we could not. Chaos erupted. Lord Kale shot to his feet, his face a thundercloud of fury. Enough. This is a traitorous farce. She is a spy. An impostor sent to destroy this union. His guards, stationed throughout the hall, drew their swords, moving to seize her. But before a single blade could touch her, Theseus was there. He moved with a speed that belied his illness, placing his body between Sabina and the advancing guards. His alpha power erupted, a wave of pure command that slammed into the room, forcing everyone to their knees. The very air crackled with his authority. You will not touch her, he growled, the sound echoing with the force of his wolf. He turned, his back to the treacherous uncle, to the false princess, to the entire stunned court. His eyes, full of a stormy, devastating certainty, found Sabina's. I know my mate, he declared, his voice raw with emotion. I have known her soul since we were children, carving promises into an old tree. I know her fire, her mind, her courage. I have felt it in every word she spoke, in every challenge she issued, in a kiss that felt like coming home. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her borrowed cheek. I do not care what face you wear. My wolf has always known you. I have always known you. You are my Sabina. The moment the words left his lips, the unconditional public recognition of her true self, the bond did not simply form. It detonated. A shockwave of pure golden energy exploded from their hearts, visible for a blinding second. It was the force of a truth too long denied, a connection stronger than any magic. Sabina gasped as the cursed ring on her finger shattered, the metal exploding into harmless black dust. The air in the great hall still vibrated with the explosive power of the mate bond. The shards of the cursed ring fell from Sabina's finger like black, glittering dust, and with them, the prison of Gina's face dissolved. It was not a gentle transformation. It was a rebirth. The features of the maid Ilara shimmered and melted away, like a distorted reflection clearing in water. The line of her jaw strengthened, her cheekbones lifted, and her eyes, once a muted brown, blazed into their true brilliant sapphire blue. Princess Sabina stood revealed, not as a memory or a ghost, but as living, breathing truth, her own face finally a perfect mirror of the fierce spirit that had always resided within. A simultaneous, horrific unraveling occurred across the room. As Sabina's true form emerged, Gina's stolen beauty contorted. The princess's lovely face sagged, the skin withering like old parchment to reveal the gaunt, sharp-boned visage of the ancient witch beneath. Her eyes, now sunken and burning with bitter hatred, were those of a stranger, a creature of dark pacts and deeper ambition, bound to Sabina's uncle not by loyalty, but by a shared hunger for power. No! Lord Kale's roar was one of pure, undiluted fury. His perfect plan, years in the making, had crumbled in a single, blinding moment. Drawing his sword, he lunged not for Theseus, but for Sabina, the source of his ruin. But he had underestimated the restorative power of a true mate bond. The sickness that had plagued Theseus was gone, burned away by the golden energy that now coursed through his veins. In a blur of motion, the Alpha King moved, his own sword meeting his uncle-in-law's with a shriek of steel. The hall erupted into chaos as Kale's loyalists drew their weapons, but they were met by the disciplined, furious force of Theseus's personal guard, who had been waiting for this moment. The fight was short, brutal, and decisive. Betrayal had made Kale reckless, and righteousness made Theseus's warriors unstoppable. Lord Kale was disarmed and forced to his knees, his personal guard subdued around him. Gina, her magic broken and her disguise a tattered ruin, could only spit curses as chains were clamped around her wrists. Then, silence fell, heavy and profound. Theseus turned, his chest heaving, his gaze sweeping over the court until it found her, Sabina. His Sabina. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, and his hands, still gripping the hilt of his sword, came up to cradle her face. His touch was reverent, his storm-gray eyes drinking in every detail of the face he had been searching for in every shadow, every conversation, every stolen glance. "You," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion too vast for words. "It was always you." Tears she had held back for weeks finally fell, tracing paths through the grime of her ordeal. She leaned into his touch, her hands coming up to cover his. "You found me," she breathed. "Even when I was lost, you found me." He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against the solid, steady beat of his heart. It was not the embrace of a king for a political partner. It was the desperate, grateful hold of a man who had reclaimed the other half of his soul. 3 days later, under a sun that seemed to shine with a cleaner, brighter light, the mating ceremony took place. There were no dark spells, no political manipulations, no hollow-eyed impostors. There was only Sabina, radiant in her rightful silvers and blues, and Theseus, his gaze holding a warmth his people had not seen in years. When he spoke his vows, his voice carried across the assembled kingdoms, a promise etched not just in law, but in blood and memory. "I choose the girl from the oak tree, the woman who challenged me, the soul that called to mine across any distance, any magic, any war. I choose my mate." And when he leaned in, his fangs marked the smooth skin of her shoulder, sealing their bond for all eternity. It was not a treaty that was sealed. It was a healing. The generations of bloodshed between their fathers, the suspicion, the grief. It all seemed to wash away in the tide of their united love. As her blood mingled with his and the bond settled into its eternal, unbreakable rhythm, Sabina looked into the eyes of her king, her mate, her childhood friend. The princess who had become a ghost, a servant, a rebel, was finally, triumphantly, home. The promise carved into the roots of an old oak tree had, against all odds, been fulfilled. A special shout-out to Possum Smile. Thank you for standing with my channel so consistently. Your support doesn't go unnoticed. I see you, and I truly appreciate you. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, plus your favorite moment and character. I really love hearing your thoughts and chatting with you. Until the next love story, bye for now.